Right, well, look, thank you. Morning, everyone. It's great to be here, and a couple of things before I start. I've really enjoyed being part of Startup to Stand Up. It's a lovely group of people, and I've made some really great friends. So when Ollie asked me to come and talk to you guys, it was a very easy thing for me to say yes to. So thank you very much for having me. Another quick point that I want to make is that actually I really admire anyone who starts their own business. It's an incredibly challenging and lonely place to be. And it's, it's a terribly courageous thing to do, which falls outside of the purview of a lot of people. And oftentimes your friends and your family don't know how best to support you. And so to have a group like this that you can access is incredibly powerful. So when Ollie invited me to come and talk to you today, I asked him how best I could add value to such an experienced group. And he said, John, you've had experiences in a bunch of different businesses. Why don't you come and speak about the importance of organizational culture? And I thought that was a good idea. So I came up with this rather magnificent title, Organizational Culture, building a team of inspired, purposeful people, giving them autonomy, trust, and mastery. And then as I came to prepare this talk, I thought to myself, this title is actually pretty rubbish and doesn't really convey me or what I want to talk about. So I've changed the title just a bit to why to build a fucking great team. And I want to talk about why rather than how. There's a ton of resources out there on how to do things. In fact, actually, if you think back through our lives, it's spent learning how to do things. And I've always lived in a why space. And I think being able to try to understand why things happen and why you should do things is really the fundamental starting point of everything. So a little story to give you a bit of context before we begin. I grew up in Guernsey, which a lot of you will know is a small island in the middle of the English Channel. And I was fortunate enough to have this idyllic childhood. I had a very stable home life, had loving parents. I had a younger sister, and pretty much everything was perfect. And my primary school was like a 5-minute walk across fields, past cows that would say hello to me in the morning. And I really had everything that a young boy could hope for. I certainly wasn't spoiled, but I wasn't left needing for anything at all. And certainly I had an abundance of love and kindness. But every year my parents did something so truly horrible to both me and my sister that it has left us scarred. They insisted on taking us to the pantomime. And this is exactly how I remember it. A man dressed as a woman, Robin Hood, who was far too sexy, and the whole thing was unbearable. But one year, when I was about aged 10, there was this little skit in the pantomime that went something like this. The dame had somehow got like a pound note, and she had this pound, and she was on stage with Robin and Friar Tuck, and Robin said, "Oh, you owe me a couple of pounds. Why don't you give me £1 now, and you can pay me the rest later?" And so the dame said, "Oh, that's a good idea," and gave her the pound. And then Friar Tuck said, "Robin, you owe me a couple of pounds. Why don't you pay me £1 now and pay me £1 later?" And round it went. And then the dame said, "Oh, actually, Friar, you owe me a couple of pounds. Why don't you pay me £1 now and you can pay me £1 later?" And the money sort of did this full circle. And then, of course, Robin said, "Oh, you've got another pound. Like, you can actually clear your debt with me now," to the dame. And around this money went again, and all the way back until it arrived back at the dame. And this silly little skit changed my life forever, because it was at that moment that I realized that even though I was an individual and I was actually plugged into the world in ways that I certainly at that day couldn't really possibly imagine, and that we are much more connected as individuals than we possibly realize. And it was this complete reframing of my worldview, and I found it fascinating. And I became fascinated with why the world works the way it does. So to begin our discussions about why we should build great teams, I think we need to reframe our understanding of why businesses exist at all, what they are, and why we should even care. Because I think businesses allow us to do three amazing things: to make money, to surround ourselves with people we love, and to make the world a better place. So let's start with money. There was a study done by Harvard in which they measured 200 organizations over, I think, about a 10-year period. And they all had different cultures, and they measured the net income difference between the best performing and the worst performing companies. And the difference was 675%. This has been outlined in this fabulous book called The Culture Code by Daniel Coyle. And having profitable businesses is really important because all of the wealth in the world is created by business. And profitable businesses can do two things. They can pay their staff, and when you pay a member of staff, you are usually contributing to a family, and you get to pay taxes. And taxes go towards educating everybody, looking after us when we can't look after ourselves, and building the environment for us all to thrive. The limited liability company, which is, we all own, I think are one of the greatest inventions of all time, as they serve multiple outcomes at the same time, and they've driven global growth and improvement. So about 500 years ago, limited liability companies were invented about 500 years ago. And before this time, very little change, very little progress was made. And one of the reasons for this was that if you wanted to start a business, you had to take on board all the risk personally, which meant that if the business failed, you personally could end up in debtor's jail. So with large amounts of risk came little investment in the future. And with no investment in the future, there was no growth. And with no growth, the future never improved. And if the future never improved, there was very little trust that the future would improve. But with the invention of a limited liability company, that meant that the risk was contained within that entity. It meant that people were much more willing to invest in the future. And this investment led to growth. And growth meant the future did improve. And when the future improves, you have much more trust in the future. And when you have trust in the future, you have investment in the future because people think they're going to get their money back. It really is a wonderful, wonderful system. But businesses are also simply just a group of human beings, group of people trying to improve the world for another group of human beings. And they happen to call that group their customers. And it's a real privilege, I think, to go to work and serve someone else. And the problem with a lot of our workplaces is that the higher purpose is not spoken about, it's forgotten. Work has become siloed, and the dots have become much harder to see joined up. But businesses are also what I call a skein. So a skein is a wonderful word. It means like a yarn of thread, but also means an interconnected chain of events. And if you think about any business that goes backwards from the outcome, so whatever your outcome is, and this is what a typical business might look, it always starts with people. And it's the people that design the business, that start the business, that create the flows and the structure, that design the systems. And it's the people that forge the relationships and come up with all the ideas. And one of the main metrics that businesses use to measure and define their success is money, which is okay. But I think we've kind of forgotten about the customers that we serve. And when we start focusing on money, then businesses sort of become a tool to make money. And I think that really rather misses the point. And you will have noticed, if you've ever worked in a business, that all the people in a business go home at the end of every day. And it's the people inside the business that also create the families, that create the communities, which is where you and I live. So the health of one directly impacts the health of the other and vice versa. Businesses are a vital component of our lives, and they're seamlessly integrated with everything that we do. And it's because of these businesses and the trust in the future that has been built up over the last 500 years that we now live in this amazing world where we all have homes to live in and cars to drive and food in our tummies, too much food from time to time probably, and technology that allows us to be in the same room communicating whilst being hundreds of miles apart, with many safety layers around us. We know that if we get sick, an ambulance will come by and take us to hospital, and we'll hopefully be fixed. And we know as we get older, there's a care system in place that will look after us. And we also know there's always something good to watch on TV. But this amazing world has only been possible because there's been a 1,000-year legacy of people doing, people just like us, but with less resource, doing amazing things like creating businesses, inventing things, creating things. And we actually link arms with all of the people who came before us. And we link arms with all of the people that will come next. And whilst the sun shines momentarily upon us, I think it is our privilege to try to leave the world slightly better than we found it. And continue this fantastic legacy that we're currently enjoying. So when we think about businesses this way, it seems that they are the best way of creating what I think could be a win-win-win scenario. And if we agree that people are the start of that skein of businesses, and if we get that bit right by creating great cultures, the business becomes more profitable. You as an owner become more successful. The staff are happier, the customers, your customers are happier, and the families of all your customers and all your staff are happier. We get to pay more taxes, and we build brighter communities. This to me feels like the largest wealth creation opportunity that we have, not just for business, but for our communities as well. And so hopefully we can accept that people are really important inside businesses and in our lives. And if we can accept that, then we want people behaving in a certain way that aligns with what will benefit everyone, us, the businesses, and society in the best way. So what is acceptable and what's not, without having to have it like written down all the time, the rules? What feels right? And that starts with culture, and you know, that's a whole big super stuff, and you know, it comes from our beliefs and our nationality and our friends and our history and our parents and our background, and also, you know, very much so the environment. So as an example, you know, I don't have to tell you what sort of behaviors would be acceptable at these two different events. You know, they are very, very different, and you know, there's not rules written down about this. You don't get handed you know, a couple of A4 sheets of paper when you go to a rave and say, well, this is how we're all going to behave. It's just kind of like the environment and the feeling and the way it is. Or how would you behave in these two different environments? So that's really kind of like the why I think culture is so important. And if we can start thinking about businesses and environments and what impacts human behavior, we can start thinking about businesses more like this. And this is a Monergy Flow business model. And it really, I hope it encapsulates everything that I've just briefly touched on. I don't know if you can see my mouse here move, but hopefully you can. So on the left-hand side, it is really important for businesses to make money. They go towards paying taxes, they go towards paying families, they go to the survival of the business. But money, as you know, doesn't just turn up. To make money, you have to sell something to somebody. That's the S. I used to think in terms of products or services, but these days, I think very much more in experiences. I think what we're doing is we're sharing experiences, and then that's what we're buying and selling. To sell something to somebody, you have to tell them you've got something to sell, right? And that's marketing. And the trouble with sort of direct marketing, selling, like saying, "Hi, I'm John, I've got something to sell." I think when we do that, we risk selling to what I define as a terrorist, because you end up with a transactional relationship. So if we're buying and selling purely based on transactions, how much something costs in return for something else, we might end up with a terrorist in our organization. And the terrorist is a bad client. They don't really like to pay. They don't really value your services. They make your life a misery. They slag you off to their friends. What would be much better is to have ambassadors as clients who really like what you're doing, will be forgiving when things don't go quite right, and will promote you to their friends. And I think the best way of doing that is actually switching how we talk about ourselves and our marketing. And rather than saying, "Hello, I'm John, this is what I've got to say," saying, "Hello, here I am as an individual, what I stand for, what I believe in, my principles." And if we can talk about ourselves in that way, then people walking past on the street who align with us will come over for a chat. And then you've made a friend. A friend is much more likely to be a client, and you've made an ambassador. But that is impossible to do without a brand. B stands for brand, and the brand of a company is really just its personality, like its culture, its principles, its values, what it stands for, you know, its colors and its shape and everything like that, and its environment. But businesses don't really exist in any real sense. And of course, it's the humans at the start of the chain of events that have the culture, define what's acceptable, what's not, how we're going to do things, the environment and all that stuff. So rather than focusing on the money, I think we should switch, and we should be focusing on the humans, because if we've got great humans working for us around a shared purpose, then we've got a very clear brand. When we've got a clear brand, our marketing is crystal clear. People know what to expect. They'll be attracted to you. The right type of people will be attracted to you. Then you can sell more stuff to people who like you and make you money that way. And then I think you should be reinvesting your money with nurture, meaningful connections around a purpose and a secure future and work. And of course, love, because as human beings, you know, we love to feel loved and give love in return. And then you plug that back into your humans, and guess what? You've got even better humans. Clearer brand, better marketing, sell even more stuff to even more people who want to buy from you, and spiral up we go. And the added benefit of this model, as I alluded to earlier, is that the humans go home to their families every day. And if we can create happy families, happy humans in the workplace, it's not only better for our business, but it's better for their families, and happy families become happy communities. And that's where we live. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is how we are going to make more money, surround ourselves with people we love, and make the world a better place.
John, that was fabulous. Thank you very, very much. Really was.
Thank you.
Any questions? Any questions from any of us on what John's just raised and presented? Peter.
Yeah, it's very good. I think it brings it home in applying to businesses. I mean, my background is 23 years in the military, and that has its own culture, its own ethos.
Yeah, absolutely.
It stands out. And in contrast to that, you have the NHS. which has a breakdown in culture and doesn't work. And I think that lack of culture is what is the biggest problem with it, to be honest. You've got people with the ethos to save lives at the ground level doing all the work, and then you've got people at the top who are more interested in the money, and it's a clash. I mean, in the military, we're very lucky because the military run the military. You have other people involved, but they are people who may not have the same ethos. But everybody who's running the military has that military ethos and what they need to do. At the end of the day, if it's whether you're a general or an admiral or whatever, if you need to pick up a rifle, you pick up a rifle. But yeah.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks, Peter. Thanks for that. Any last questions for John whilst we've got John this morning? Neil.
Hi, John. Yeah, a great presentation. I was
Thank you.
very pleased. Well, sort of good to see you've aligned, or your diagram mapped an awful lot to the way that I have broken down trying to help people design this. I'm an experienced designer, product designer, service designer, and actually understanding what people's principles and sense of purpose are is really at the heart of actually doing that, but trying to get people to actually have the confidence in the fact that don't try and be like somebody else, but actually your group of people, your community, what your aim is actually probably the most important thing at the heart of this. So I was just wondering, in your experiences, how have you encouraged the people that you work with to actually, as it was, believe in themselves, really?
Yeah, good question. And that can be quite an elusive lover, can't it? We've had I've been using that Monergy flow for years in various businesses I've been working with, and it always works. But you have to be really careful with it, because terrorists are, and terrorists aren't always necessarily customers. Sometimes they're actually people working inside the organization as well. They're like members of staff, and you really do need kind of everyone aligned and buying into it. And if you lose that, the whole thing can crumble very, very easily. So there was one company that I worked for that for a period of about 2 or 3 years, it was just amazing. It was like going to work with your brothers and sisters. I loved it. I loved being at work more. I loved being with my actual family. Don't tell them that. And then one of the guys left because he was young and he wanted to go off and do something else, and that was fine. And suddenly it kind of just like was a little bit sort of wobbly. And then there was quite a senior guy who did something a bit stupid, and sort of over the course of like maybe 3 or 4 years, like the whole thing sort of like fell apart. And then it's like, trying to kind of piece that all together again is really difficult. It's like trying to put a jelly back together. So these things, can sort of be lost quite easily. And this is where I think things like histories and shared stories are so important, and being really clear about who you are as an individual and a business from day one, because people who don't align with you just won't, it just doesn't feel right, and they won't come and be near you, and then you give yourself a much better chance of avoiding these terrorists.
I think Neil picked up on something. You're wearing a great t-shirt, an Oasis t-shirt, and if you'd have asked either of the two brothers about the culture and being in that band at one point was the most fabulous thing in the world, and then one day it went spectacularly wrong, to a point where it was never going to get back together, maybe. But I think you can make a lot of comparisons between bands and companies.
Oh, absolutely.
Rock groups and
it's just another group of humans, right? So I don't know why, like we talk about business as if it's separate and different. It's not. It's just a collective noun for a group of humans. families, education, rock bands, football clubs. Like everything is just a group of human beings trying to move forwards together in some way.
I mean, it's quite as you were describing that, one of the things that I recalled was I've been part of companies quite often that have been bought by large corporations, and it's quite strange that when you can have the same people in the same office in the same room, if the people outside the room and the pressures and the kind of things that you're doing change, all of a sudden the culture disappears. Such as I worked for a company called Conchango, which was one of the top 3 digital agencies in the country. They got taken over by EMC, that came EMC Consulting, and the whole thing had disappeared within 3 years. And it's quite amazing how you can destroy a £52 million company within 3 years just by changing the culture and the ideology. No, it's interesting to know how, you know, it's how those external pressures can put it. Similarly to what Peter was saying about the NHS, you know, it's the people on the ground have that culture and have that belief, but they're not being supported by the people that lead them.
Yeah, well, I mean, and you know, the power of the group is incredible. There's an amazing experiment that I read about, which just popped into my mind, which used football supporters as a sort of a test bed. And I can't remember what it was, but there's a bunch of football supporters all like wearing, I don't know, red shirts going towards a match. And they put a test guy in a red shirt at the side of the street and faked a heart attack. And lo and behold, like a bunch of football supporters came over and helped him out and, you know, whisked him off to ambulance and what have you. But changed the color of the guy's shirt to blue and he has a heart attack and everyone ignores him. And it's amazing to me that actually, what is your own inherent beliefs? And they shift, right? So you might be, you know, at home and go, well, I'd always help out a guy who was having a heart attack. Yeah, absolutely. But you put yourself in a different environment, and you don't do it. And then there's that other incredible experiment, and it's quite famous about, you know, when they got a test subject to give someone else in another room an electric shock. It's quite famous. You must have all heard of it, I reckon. And Matt's nodding his head. I know he's heard about it. So they basically they had a test subject and a big machine, and they said, you're going to administer electric shocks to someone in the next room. And they had someone in a lab coat that looked like a doctor with a notepad and what have you. And you had to go up and make it more and more and more higher voltage as we go. And people do it, and they start off with a low sort of voltage, and the guy in the other room is just acting, but they're screaming and like, no, please stop. And the doctor goes, no, carry on. We just need to keep going until like they're giving them lethal doses of electricity. And it's just that environment that people find themselves in can dramatically change their behavior.
Definitely. It did remind me of the start of Ghostbusters, that description. But anyway, just for those who...
Yes, yeah. Well, we've all given someone a shock when they've been sat next to a pretty girl we want to date.
Thank you.
Thanks, Neil. Thanks, John. That's been fabulous.
Yeah, pleasure. Thank you for having me and giving me the opportunity.
You're invited back anytime. You know that. So really, really good. You're going to get a lot of love and big ups and respect on LinkedIn today and various other media platforms. So we really do appreciate that. We'll get